it will be over to you, okay?
Okay.
So let's go. Hello, everyone. Julia here. Thank you for attending the CIA's next webinar for the New Frontiers Symposium, which has been doing fabulous over the last couple of weeks. And today we have the wonderful Agent 999.
No, you have to say it right. You have to say it's 99.
Okay, 99. Patricia Walsh, all the way in Florida. Welcome, Patricia, and thanks for coming back with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
now,
you.
just a little bit of background with Agent 999. Gosh, we met at UAC 8 years ago, Patricia.
Years ago at UAC, yeah.
8 years ago with Venus retrograde at UAC. And Patricia said, I'm coming to Australia. I said, great, come and do something. And it was really quite a quick chat at the pool. And it all started from there. She came to then 2 or 3 star camps that we did. Two star camps where we did nodal journey work out in the outback. It was so amazing. 4 days immersed with your journeying. I'll never forget it.
I really still remember your images, your beehive. This was the beginning of CIA, and you had all this beehive stuff. Remember that?
The cosmic bee. That's
the
right.
Cosmic bee.
I journeyed as the cosmic bee,
yeah.
and a lot of things cleared up, I suppose. So we're really thrilled to have you, Patricia, because you are an incredible astrologer, an incredible past life therapist, and karmic nurse, in a sense. Well, that's probably not the best word, but, the amount of things that people, let's say, absorb from you and your information and knowledge is incredible. So we're looking forward to today. I particularly like how you explained what you were doing today with the arrows of Sagittarius falling, down like stars onto the earth. And, God knows, during these times we need some inspiration like this. So really looking forward to your presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Over to you.
All right. So here we are, out of one, many. So that was my vision. I'll get into that in a little bit, what Yules was talking about. Just wanted to say welcome. And here we are at the beginning of another shift. We've had a lot of shifts. I think in some ways this is going to feel like a welcome shift, but it also has its caveats, as does everything during this time of Pluto in Capricorn, and actually the train wreck in Capricorn. So I just put a little quote from myself down here about astrology pointing out to us, just by its very nature, that the plethora of stars in the sky allows for patterns to emerge with diverse streams of meaning. By that, I mean, each single archetype has a large spectrum of meaning, a broad spectrum of meaning. Yet each diverse stream is also universal, thus it's archetypal, right? So just the very nature of astrology itself points out to us that there's a diversity and a unity that go hand in hand, an underlying oneness, as we know, that's always there. And that the diversity of expression within that oneness is part of the muchness and the richness of life itself. So I think that as these nodes shift into Sagittarius Gemini, we're going to be exploring more of that on an individual and a collective level. So this was the image, or it's my depiction of the image that came to me. I'm just trying to, I'm going to come back to this slide later because we might want to do a little bit of visualization with this. But the idea was this single arrow going up into the sky. And when I was contemplating the transit, and then all of these stars falling down in, multiple forms. This is, of course, a little bit of a play on the reverse of E pluribus unum, right? Which is out of many out of many, one. And I think we have the reverse of that coming up. It's out of one, many. You know, to me, that image implies that the path of evolution for us now, because those of you who don't know me, I didn't really introduce myself. You know, my basis in astrology is evolutionary astrology. And in evolutionary astrology, we're always kind of looking to this understanding that there's a divine intention, and that the divine intention is always pushing us to move, to grow, to mutate, to evolve. So my perception of this is that in this transit, in the next 18 months, we're going to be looking at moving away from those things, our cherished goals, our paths, our beliefs, and our truths, to open to divergent points of view, right? And as I said in my write-up, it's something about what have you aimed for in the past that's now going to be, you're now going to be presented with new opportunities. How is your own authenticity and personal truth evolving? And what new learning are you going to come across that's going to expand your horizon? I'll stop for questions periodically. So here, as we contemplate the meanings of just the archetypal meanings of Gemini and Sagittarius, I also have the dates here for the last times that Gemini, the nodes were South Node Sag and North Node Gemini. So you can contemplate and look at for yourself where this falls in your chart, and also during this time of those years, what was going on. One thing I pointed out here is that the last time that the nodes were shifting from Capricorn Cancer to Gemini Sag was shortly after 9/11. So we had a kind of similar energy at the time. On 9/11, the nodes were at Cancer Cap at 3 degrees. So, you know, it's kind of interesting to revisit that. And then if you think of what happened after 9/11, as the node shifted into Gemini Sag and all of this, there was actually some, I mean, the backdrop was different because Pluto was in Sag, and I'm going to talk about that in another slide. The backdrop, the energy of the time was a little different because Pluto was in Sag. But there was a lot of, you know, dissemination of information and locking down information at the time. There was a lot of conspiracy theories. There always are when there's huge events that happen on the global stage. When there's a lack of information, people come and fill in the blanks or try to discern the truth of what they feel they're being told. So we're in a similar time. Let's just back up and go over a little bit of what Sag deals with. I mean, this is very basic stuff, right? As we know, Sagittarius can deal with religiosity, dogma, beliefs, cult-like thinking, fanaticism. Again, you know, we had Pluto and Sag back in 95 to 2008. It was the rise of religious fanaticism. 9/11 being part of the outcome of that, or an effect of that. Part of Sagittarius is also enthusiasm. And I always like when we think of the root of the word of enthusiasm, comes from entheos, the Greek entheos, which means to be possessed by a god, right? And so this gives us this picture of Sagittarian energy, which is just overcome with something that feels like a divine inspiration. And that can be, in reality, what the empowered sense of Sagittarius is about, is to open one to that cosmic level of inspiration. But it can also be that we have some mistruths that we hold as divine truth, right? i.e. religious fanaticism. Cosmological meaning, the search for cosmological meaning, expansion, optimism, all of these things. I'm just putting out these keywords here so that you'll be thinking in these terms, because these are things that are going to come back into the collective screen again. These are things that are going to be in our focus. Higher learning, philosophies, the idea of synthesizing things, law, long distance travel, immigration, freedom, and what we do with that freedom, or when we're limited with that freedom, and all kinds of permutations from there. But since it represents the South Node, you know, we can feel that collectively we're being nudged away from something about our perceptions of our, you know, it deals with beliefs, our perceptions, and our personal belief systems, certain things that we set our sights towards, our cherished truths, right? These will all come into focus again. Places where we've not been integrous, where we've not been honest, where we've not been aligned with truth. Our own personal honesty may come up for review. It may also be on the collective stage. What to believe is also a critical question, as we have these new perspectives that are being encountered if we allow ourselves to open ourselves to other perspectives. As I said before, you may have had, you may in your personal lives find a reassessment of your goals, what drove you before, what you found to be your single goal. You know, Sagittarius is very singular minded. That may start to open up to new options. You know, you may find a variety of ways to express your truth. You may find new ways to bring some of your higher vision down into, you know, down to earth. You may find your sense of authenticity and your personal truth is evolving. And also whatever you're opening up to learning, that you may be more open to wanting to learn different things. And how is that going to expand your horizon? Maybe that's going to open you up to a diversity of things that you weren't aware of before, that then is going to have you set new goals. And so when we think of the Gemini side of things, right? You know, Gemini deals with, yeah, I always say, Gemini deals with collecting up the dots. It's the trees and not the forest, right? Sagittarius is very interested in the forest, and Gemini is very interested in the trees. So it's the trees, not the forest. It's generally associated with that which is local to us, our neighborhood, our immediate environment. It's more now, as opposed to Sagittarius, which is more future-minded. Gemini is more about the now, how we get stimulated in the now, what we disseminate in the now, how we circulate within the now. You know, the question of travel, like Jules and I were saying, is there going to be long distance travel? We don't know. You may find, you know, you're taking long trips in your neighborhood, you know, something like that. We don't know. Gemini in general also relates to siblings and aunts and uncles, twins, trade and commerce. International commerce is a key word also for this axis. Finding words, using your words, finding ways to communicate, especially those big ideas. Finding bite-sized nuggets to bring those abstract concepts into being, so that they can be disseminated, so that they, like bite-sized morsels of wisdom, right? Bringing the vision down into these bite-sized nuggets. Reactivity. So every part, you know, every positive, just like Sag has got its negative side. Just because Gemini, the transiting node, is a north node, doesn't necessarily mean that collectively or individually we always express its positive aspects. So it also has its shadow, and within that there's reactivity, right? There's scatteredness as part of this archetype. There's duality and polarization. This is something I'm particularly concerned about, considering the themes that we've been going through globally, and how that is so deep in our psyche right now. We are so confronted with the consequences of duality and polarization, and increased polarization. With the Gemini North Node, I think that's a continued focus. And then here's another one that's kind of interesting. Opinions belong to Gemini. And And that's a good thing, right? Because in this transit, we're going to want to open up to others' opinions. But so it's a good thing that everybody has an opinion, and then it's a bad thing that everybody has an opinion. So the etymology, or the origin of the word opinion, is specifically a judgment, see this, a judgment formed or a conclusion reached, especially one based on evidence that does not produce knowledge or certainty. In the Old French, it's an opinion or a view are judgments founded upon probabilities. So I want you to just digest that for a moment. It's a judgment formed or a conclusion reached based on evidence that does not produce knowledge or certainty. So opinion and the kind of knowledge that's gathered in Gemini is not always about drawing a conclusion. And this is what we don't do well as humans. We don't deal with ambiguity, right? We're not comfortable with that. We want to make a period at the end of the sentence, right? Now we can fall down the rabbit hole in our technology and go from, one learning to another, which can also be very Gemini. Yet there's always a part of us that's going to want to bring it to some conclusion. And that, what opinion means as an etymology is to have an open mind to revolving information that allows you to remain open and comfortable with uncertainty. Now, opinion in popular usage, because we also use it in conjunction with judgment, like in law, right, which is a thing it belongs to the Sagittarius archetype. When a judge offers a conclusion, they say that this is the court's opinion. And so we have come to take the word opinion and use it in conjunction with judgment, right? So it means, and this is an important thing to say, like I said, it's really good that people have opinions, and then maybe it's not so good that everybody has opinions, because we take our opinions like law, right? Or some people express their opinions like law. And that's where we miss this kind of, the more spacious part of what this archetype is about. And, my hope is that, during this time, that collectively and individually we'll be more open to seeking information, but and questioning everything. But when I say questioning everything, I mean really questioning everything, which means no matter what you feel you've settled on as knowledge, question it, and then question it again, and then question it again, and then find out something new and question that, and allow yourself to start to become comfortable with that sense of uncertainty and ambiguity, right? Without trying to package it up and make a judgment and then be reactive to that. That's part of the danger of this. I mean, we've seen this going on a lot collectively, right? The bottom line of this whole seminar, this whole webinar, I mean, I have a lot more information to share with you, but I'm just going to give you a nugget right now. The bottom line of this transit, as I see it, is for each of us to get back to a sense of whatever we view or whatever we know ourselves to be as our authentic selves, and then keep questioning. So I think first we need to turn everything off. I think that coming into this transit, it might be a really good idea to take a technology fast, to take a media fast, and reacquaint yourself with what is your authentic self and your personal truth. And as you reacquaint yourself with deeper levels of that, continue to question it and continue to dig, right? And then open yourself up to information. But don't allow that information, don't allow your authentic sense of self to form this judgment because it's so reliant upon your identity. Always allow your identity to be that Sagittarian sense right? And not the judgment sense. Although judgment can belong to Sagittarius, as we know, right? Because we're seeking meaning, right? But recognize that truth evolves, and that during this process, that's my kind of wish for everyone. Okay.
Patricia, sorry,
Yes.
sorry, darling. Just wondering, have you got bangles on or anything like that near your chest or your hands?
Oh, you know what? It might be my necklace is hitting my microphone.
I'm listening, going, what is that thing? And the other week we realized it was someone's earring. So
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think that should do it, huh?
Okay, cool.
I just moved my necklace. I think it was right near my mic.
That's better already.
Okay,
thanks.
Good. Were there any questions or comments or anything? I'm stopping right now. We're not really getting into the juice of things yet. Okay.
Sorry, we can still hear it a bit. So I don't know. Can you take it off, maybe?
I don't know what's going on. How about we do that?
Necklace. We're just getting more comments than questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. So in an evolutionary perspective, when we're looking at transits, be they collective or be they individual, the backdrop is always what's happening in the backdrop, the outer planets, but specifically the context of, again, in your personal chart, the context of any transits, we would always look to Pluto and the nodes, right? So I had an analogy in my book about how Pluto and the south node work together. And my vision was like in a band. So Pluto is like the drummer, right? The drummer is setting a beat. You're not even fully conscious of it, but your foot is tapping along with it. It's that strong, right? It's there all the time. It sets the whole tone for the whole piece of music. And every performer builds off that basic beat. That is what Pluto is doing in a particular sign and house in your chart. Collectively, that is what Pluto is doing in a sign. It sets this drumbeat tone that everything else taps along to. It's colored by. Now, the south node works in concert with that, much like the bass player does. So the bass player is very attuned to and aligned with the beat that's going on, yet he has a kind of scale, right, that he can play along and riff off of that beat. And this is very much like the south node. Now, there's two ways to look at this, the transiting nodes, and while I talk about both of them, we can talk about it collectively or individually. So when we look at collective, we have to look back to Pluto, and what is Pluto doing now, right? So Pluto's been in Capricorn, and here's this little stellium here that we had on January 12th, which we're actually going to be living with for a long time. So we've had Pluto in Capricorn since 2008. And then beginning of this year, we had the new Pluto-Saturn synod, and there was more going on here. There's asteroids in here, and in fact, somebody, Dimitri George, just put out somebody's research on the asteroid Wuhan, which is also around here. So there was a lot going on in this synod. But when the synodic cycle that we were concluding, which was the last synodic cycle, was in the 80s, and it was Pluto and Saturn in Libra. And we were concluding that, and that set the tone for 30 some odd years. And now, as of January, we're in a Capricorn tone. So when we think of Pluto getting into, I often longingly look at Pluto heading into Aquarius, although that has its shadow side also. We're still going to be with this energy for another 37 years, because the synod has set the tone for an era, right? And this era is very Capricorn. So when Pluto went into Cap, I think it was obvious what happened, because the whole global economy crashed. We went into a winter time, right? I call, since Pluto went into Capricorn, the winter of our discontent. I always call the four apocalyptic horsemen of the karmic aspects of Capricorn are oppression, depression, suppression, and repression. When we get into, you know, Pluto and Capricorn, it's an energy of the ends are justifying the means, right? It's a winter time. It's a consolidation of power. Here are the keywords, because you can see how they play out on the archetypal level, but then also literally in the collective. Conservatism, right? Austerity, right? The winter time, right? There's not a lot of abundance around. It's cold, you're surviving, right? You've got to be stingy. You got to be Scroogey. This is all part of this energy, right? Authoritarianism and totalitarianism belong to this. It's the energy of the father state. You know, we can see all of this on the rise since Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008. Plutocracy, the consolidation of wealth by, you know, by a few and then being governed by those few. It's a classic Pluto and Capricorn theme. You know, the US is also preparing for its Pluto return. That's coming up. Pluto, Saturn, Pluto in Capricorn alone is enough to initiate a descent into shadow material because of the archetypes. Pluto is going into the underworld. Capricorn, think Capricorn, Saturn, right? It's about digging up, you know, it's about digging up the dirt of all of that we have deemed to be reality. Now, there's a general, now these are the negative sides of that, right? Or the way that the collective expresses them, because, you know, I always say humanity doesn't express ideals very well. So we're always left with how we're all working with the archetype and how it's becoming expressed. There is a general intent to bring up shadow. And the general intent, or the divine intent, however you want to say it, evolutionary intention to bring up shadow, is so that the gold can be released in the dross. This is a, you know, this is a part of digging into the shadow. And as I said, as the US comes up for its Pluto return, we're meant to be digging up the shadow. And, you know, I don't know, you know, I don't want to get too political, but, you know, to me, Trump is a personification of the US's shadow, and what he has brought forward, or unleashed, or we would say, you know, he unleashed the Kraken, right? And it's not going back in the cave anytime soon, has been the cracks of the thin veneer of civility that we think that we have, right? We have the US, I'm talking US centric. I know everybody's not here from the US. I am talking US centric, but the US sets a collective tone culturally, although that may be waning, right? I mean, you know, this signature alone, a lot of people have said, is the beginning of the end of the empire. And that's quite possible, you know. It's quite possible that as the US is maturing and coming into its Pluto return, that it takes more of an equal partnership on the stage, and on the world stage, you know, rather than the uninitiated youth that it has been. The US has got a very puer energy to it, right? The eternal youth, which is why other countries have always looked to our culture as invigorating. And, you know, it's very Sagittarian, that energy that we put out there, that persona that we put out there. So, you know, the energy of this Pluto-Saturn synod, and Pluto in Capricorn alone, and the transiting nodes in Capricorn, and the rest of the train wreck in Capricorn there, you know, like I said, not ending anytime soon, although some of those planets will be going into Aquarius soon. Also, you know, it's about maturing. It's about consequences. It's about responsibility. It's about taking responsibility. It's about mastery. But one of the classic meanings of Pluto in Capricorn, or if you were having Pluto transit your 10th house, for example, in evolutionary astrology is deconditioning, right? Deconditioning means restructuring your reality, which is what we know part of this intention here is to tear down the structures, is to transform what we've called reality before. Deconditioning means that there's a regressive process involved. You need to go back to go forward. The Cancer polarity point is going to bring up regressive behavior. It's also going to bring up a lot of emotional insecurities, right? We've also seen this collectively going on with the transiting nodes. But deconditioning means to really dig into the shadows of that which you have taken to be your reality and to reform that. And conditions we have layers and layers of conditions put upon us from the time we're born. So even before we're born, we come in with karmic conditioning, which are predisposed perceptions or outpicturings of what our expectations are, of how we think reality is, of how we shape our reality based on our internal sense of identity and feeling, right? Our Cancerian side. So we come in with karmic conditioning, and then we have, early childhood conditioning and familial conditioning and ancestral conditioning and cultural conditioning and just conditioning of what it means to be a human being and the whole collective experience of humanity on top of the whole collective archetypal experience of humanity is part of this, a widening circle of conditioning. So deconditioning here means to be examining or to be confronted with, because Pluto's not always, about let's sit around and ponder it. Pluto can be very confrontational, right? It digs up stuff. And so it's to be confronted with the limits of those conditions, and that the evolutionary push is to move beyond those limitations. So this is the backdrop of what's going on here. Now, I just want to mention with Jupiter in Capricorn too, we've had a very literal expression of this as a result of the collective deconditioning, which is a kind of loss of faith in the system. At the same time, while we have people of having a loss of faith in the system, we have the powers that be doing everything that they can to shore up the system, right? So we're back to that consolidation of power, right? We're back to the kind of, some people would say, the death throes of the patriarchy. So that expansion, Jupiter can act in both ways, right? The expansion of power can go to those who have the means to play the game, to game the system. That Jupiter in Capricorn on an individual level can be about reforming your own relationship with power and authority, your own authentic authority. Again, a wide spectrum of meaning. So there's been a big discontent with the system. This also goes back to when we had the Pluto-Uranus squares. Again, none of these transits happen in isolation. So, when Pluto went into Capricorn, we also had it squaring Uranus from 2012 to 2015, which adds to what I said, the whole phrase for this epoch, the winter of our discontent, right? Now, we will have Jupiter moving into Aquarius in December of this year. And we'll also have Saturn in Aquarius, which is tipping in now, and then it'll come back out, and then it'll go back in at the end of the year. So Saturn will be in Aquarius March to July, and then it'll tip back out and go back in December. Why that's important is because this process of deconditioning goes hand in hand with individuation. So when you decondition from something, let's say my father said I should be this, or I grew up to be a shoemaker because my father was a shoemaker and I never questioned it. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to question it, right? Because I'm having this evolutionary impulse to decondition from that. And by doing that, you would have to be discovering what it is about you, what are your wants, your needs, besides what your conditions have told you that they are. And then to get some mastery and become those things, right? So instead of being a shoemaker, you know, you become, I don't know, a hat maker or a teacher or something completely different. That process of deconditioning will lead you to individuation, right? Discovering something unique and valuable about yourself. And that's distinctly Aquarian. Now, Saturn going into Aquarius pushes that, the dichotomy of the dual rulership of both Saturn and Uranus as rulers of Aquarius. That, you know, we have the consensus, we have the want to belong, and we belong to a consensus, yet we need to rebel against the consensus to discover our individuality. So it's a continual process. Every time you step into a stage of individuation, you'll get confronted with the collective conditioning or with the massive conditioning. So every transit that we have going on, this is the backdrop, right? This is the backdrop, the stage that it's happening on. Now, on an individual level, when we start to look at the transiting nodes, going through the different houses, on an individual level, this will always depend upon your natal position of Pluto and your natal north node and south node. It's always going to refer back to that. So transiting nodes in an individual chart are called like apparent karma. They're nuances. They're nuances of your karmic script, but the karmic script is always there. The drumbeat and the bass player are still, you know, playing the same tune based on your Pluto by house and sign and your natal nodes by house and sign. So for example, let's say you have, I don't know, let's say you have a Taurus south node, and that's bringing you, karmically, you've come into this life with some issues around self-worth, and maybe it plays out as a poverty complex, right? So you've got this Taurus south node, and as part of the Taurus south node, let's take, for example, the transiting nodal axis that just happened, right? So the transiting nodal axis was in Capricorn Cancer. So what that might have brought up with you is you have your own, you know, you have your own karmic complex, but while the nodes were transiting, maybe it was bringing up some Capricornian theme, right? As the Capricorn South node, of ways that you've been forced by the system in the past. It can bring up your fears of survival. But you know, you may have had to evolve some kind of new emotional security, right? And a new way to nurture yourself. So you can see that in concert with your own nodal axis or your own karmic script, that the transiting nodes are going to push you based on the flavor of where they are by house and sign. So the Capricorn node, you know, may have pushed you towards the Cancerian north node, which would, the transiting Cancerian north node, which would have been finding ways to nurture yourself or heal the old fears, right, of being locked out of the system or repressed by the system. So, you know, let's imagine that you have that same, you know, Taurus South node, but now it's going into Sag Gemini. So you'd still be working on the same issues, but there'd be maybe a different nuance coming up, right? Maybe you took vows of poverty in a past life because of your religious beliefs, right? Think Sag and Gemini, words. And maybe that's going to come up, right? And that part of the push for you, again, back to your same poverty complex, is going to be to examine, you know, to contemplate the power of your words, watching what you vow about, what ways you've become swept up in the past with fervor around beliefs, and then finding a diversity of ways to express yourself, maybe reworking those past vows by disengaging from that past belief. So you see how that works? This is how you're going to have to think of it in an individual way, right? And I'm going to go through them. I'm going to go through the nodes through each of the houses. Let me just stop there and see if there's anything we need to answer or talk about.
No questions, just what's it called? People responding to what you say. No, not so much questions. People saying so true, mentioning Ceres and Chariklo in that Capricorn lineup. That's about it.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yep. So as I was saying before, the last time we had the nodes transiting from Cancer Cap into Sag Gemini was around 9/11. And like I said, Pluto was in Sag there, which put a pretty strong emphasis on religious ideologies and extremity of that. And what I find interesting, because we're so there now, although the nodes are at 0 degrees, we find ourselves here again, in that the last time those nodes were ending that transit and going into Sag Gemini, we were all feeling like it was the beginning of the end, right? We were all feeling like it's the end of the world as we know it. And in fact, we might say that even back then, that event, that September 11th event, was the catalyst for this increased nationalism and conservatism that we've seen going on, even though Pluto was in Sag at the time. But here we are again, right? People look like this is the end of the world as we know it. And here we are again, going into Gemini Sag out of Cancer Cap. So this is the ingress chart. The ingress chart for the nodes, can set the tone of what the, what we're looking at as far as the theme. I find it particularly interesting with the Neptune square. Okay, too many thoughts at once. Very Gemini Sag. By the way, I have a Sag, I've got a Sag sun with Mercury in Sag, Gemini moon in Gemini in the 3rd house. So I'm quite mutable, and I have a whole mutable cross. So I get whole concepts at once, and then I have to break them down into words, which is exactly what this nodal transit is part of that's about for each of us individually. So let's look at this ingress chart. With Neptune square the nodes, I've just put some keywords here. Neptune alone on a karmic level, again, I want to look at this on a karmic level, can bring up these kinds of issues. When Neptune squares the nodes in an individual chart, you're going to be, you would be bringing in both aspects of the nodes in your past life experiences, but they would be colored by the energy of Neptune. And here we have Neptune in Pisces. So collectively, as the nodes are shifting, and unfortunately for quite some time, this Neptune square is partile, meaning exact in December, January. So all of this time, we're going to say it's an orb up until the end of the year, and it's an orb until 2021, until the spring of 2021, as the nodes continue and Neptune kind of tracks along and does its thing. So here's some of the keywords about what is Neptune karmically. Neptune's going to bring up issues and wounds of naivete, of miswounded trust, of misplaced trust, burnout, psychic burnout, helplessness, issues of victim martyr, feeling overwhelmed, losing oneself and others, boundarylessness, mysticism. I mean, there's positive things to be had here too. Inability to be in the world, dissociation, escapism, delusions, illusions. As we know, one of the keywords for Neptune is disillusionment, avoidance, confusion, dissociation, soul loss, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. when we look at this on a collective level, I mean, we've had Neptune in Pisces going on for quite some time. And I would say that Neptune in Pisces is another one of those that's, if I were to put Neptune in Pisces in the band that I had before, I would make Neptune the smell of the sweat that permeates the venue the band is playing in, or I would make Neptune the feeling of the beat of the drum in your core, right? So you're tapping along with the drum, but it's the sensation of the beat of the drum in your core. It's always, Neptune is always so ever present, ever pervasive, yet you don't really put your finger on it. So it could be like the smell of the sweat of the performers, right? So we've been soaking in Neptune and Pisces for quite some time. And part of what Neptune and Pisces has been doing is making reality extremely surreal. And it only gets more and more surreal, right? So what I'm noticing, what I have been noticing, I've been actually doing a lot of reading and studying on the dynamics of conspiracy theories and information and misinformation and half-truths and hidden truths and all of that, because it's all part of the bundle. And this is part of what's coming into focus here again with the nodes transiting on this axis that's very much involved with information and knowledge and the dissemination of information and knowledge, right? So with Neptune square the nodes, I would say that part of what we see, again, with the backdrop of Pluto in Capricorn, right? There's so much distrust of the system, and rightfully so, because the system sucks. I agree, the system sucks. We have, at Pluto and Capricorn, the plutocracy, pushes the ideology of capitalism. And you know, a long time ago, I heard an interview with several people in a round table on NPR talking about the evolution of capitalism as a political ideology. And it's interesting, back in the FDR days, we used to have, and some countries still do, have more of a socialized form of capitalism, right? Like some European countries have, Canada, a socialized democracy, kind of what Bernie Sanders was talking about. You know, not socialism, socialized democracy. But capitalism, and one person said this, and this was probably 10 years ago, maybe, you know, around when Pluto went into Capricorn, that they said that the form of capitalism that we have now is called bandit capitalism. That's actually what the economists called it then. They've now renamed it to gangster capitalism. So it's the same energy. Everybody grab what you can, right? Gangster capitalism is the cronyism that's involved, the consolidation, right? And the robbing of somebody. So my point being that it didn't always used to be like this, right? It wasn't always that you had to turn around and look over your shoulder to see who was trying to rip you off. But we have been in a collective energy where you know, everybody's a used car salesman. You used to be able to go and buy things and trust the product and trust the salesperson to a certain degree, right? We used to say that bad salespeople were used car salesmen, right? And that was a certain class of salesperson, but it wasn't every salesperson out there. Well, it has, in this drumbeat of bandit capitalism, become that, right? It has become that. So there is a real need to mistrust the system. But when everybody's a used car salesman, right? I mean, in fact, the Pluto in Sag time exacerbated it even more, because the whole subprime mortgage crisis that happened 10 years prior, when Pluto was in Sag, prior to the crash, is what led us to the economic crash, right? It was the whole lie of anybody can own their house and we'll just lend you anybody because it's just free money. And who cares, you know, if you're lender worthy, because the greed, right? Pluto and Sag, the greed was so excessive. And then 10 years later, in 2008, when Pluto went into Capricorn, it was like, oops, here's the consequence of that kind of capitalism. Here's the consequence of that. The consequence of overindulgence, of greed. So yes, there is an increase in scams. There is an increase in mistrust, in mistruths, in half-truths. With Neptune squaring the nodes coming in here, I think that it's, you know, we're really going to need to be focusing on discernment, really tuning up our discernment. Because I've noticed also another trend in the conspiracy theory worlds, and I keep pointing to that, because when people are turned away from trusting any source of information, they're then going to open to many sources of information, which again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but just because you can make a YouTube video in your basement and put together certain pieces of information to make it look like something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's so. But what I have seen, and we know that the 2016 elections had a lot of, you know, bad actors putting out misinformation. And right now, it's understood that many of the things that are being held up as conspiracy theories are actually seeded by other bad actors like Russia, like China, right? Fill in the blank. Just wanting to continue with this Neptune and Pisces energy of the ability to sow chaos and confusion, and the opportunistic, parasitic kind of opportunistic energy that can harness and use that energy to keep us all confused, right? What I have seen lately in the conspiracy theory worlds is that they are purposely infiltrating what would normally be polarized groups. So, you know, you would normally have your right-wing people hating your left-wing people, and generally the left-wing people are, you know, like-minded others of, you know, kind of new agey hippie types, blah, 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 and your right-wing people, you know, the gun-toting, whatever. These are all stereotypes, but I'm just pointing out the polarities. But what's happening is that misinformation is getting sowed on both sides, and there's a blurring of even those lines happening, where some of the big conspiracies out there are attracting, you know, what would normally be the kind of, you know, new age liberal hippie types are jumping in right there with the right-wing religious fanatics. So it's an interesting time we live in, is what I can say. And with a Neptune square the nodes on this axis of information, I'm not sure it's going to get better anytime soon. Collectively, I think we're going to need to be looking at mixed messages and disillusionment. But here's the point. Neptune works also on evolutionary intention. And Neptune works hand in hand with deconditioning. And how it works with deconditioning, and this is what's been happening on a collective level. What we see is the fallout of people who cannot trust the system anymore, right? So we see it having become, you know, fear-based in all these different camps. And so you have some people, you know, thinking it's Armageddon, and they're setting up whatever, you know, grabbing their arms and, you know, needing to defend themselves. And then you have, you know, there's so many varieties of the way that the collapse of systems is affecting people. Neptune is good, and we're supposed to be doing that because we're supposed to be taking responsibility for ourselves, right? Or holding those in power accountable to the responsibility that we give them. And if that doesn't happen collectively, they're not going to do it, right? But with Neptune involved in there, Neptune is pushing the narrative of getting disillusioned with the system. And disillusionment is a part of deconditioning, right? But again, we don't do well with that ambiguity. We don't do well when there's too many blanks left to be filled in, right? And this is where we rush to surface information or something to give ourselves some sense of self-security. So we just have to keep our eyes on that, right? Before I go on, I do want to mention here that, like I said, we have this whole plethora of chain of planets that happen. They, as you all know, but I'll point it out, the south nodes, the planetary south nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are also in these degrees of Capricorn, right? Spread out from 20 to 29 degrees. The planetary south nodes that have been under an evolutionary push by when this south node came from, you know, that goes this way, right? So the south node itself, the transiting south node in Capricorn, passed these planetary south nodes. And then Pluto, Saturn conjunct on these planetary south nodes, and they all transited their own south nodes. So again, when we talk about the Capricorn archetype, what we call reality, the very structure of the systems that we have put in place collectively for aeons, right, is under a reformation project. It's a big project going on. Okay, let me just stop and see if there's any questions before I go on. I'm going to start moving into the planet, the transiting nodes moving through the houses.
No questions, Patricia, but I also, I mean, as you've got on there, the North Node of Uranus on Venus's transit. And I mean, Venus is, like, I'm just looking at this chart, and Venus rules the moon and the sun. And so she's kind of very, very strong. It's almost like she's preparing the ground.
Well, Venus
Gemini.
is also, I mean, it's an interesting thing because Venus, you know, is going to station retrograde there. That's a Venus point here, right?
Yeah, that's, well, this Venus point is 13.
Yeah, it's going to station.
13.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Retrograde here.
Yeah, on 21, I think it is. Yeah, so it's like preparing the ground. You know, by the time it comes back, it will meet the node.
Yeah.
At the, you know, end. It's like, okay, you can come now.
Yeah.
I've got something ready.
Yeah. And you know, to me, again, though, that can also be because if we think of the archetype of Venus, you know, Venus it can be, as ruler of Libra, can be about extremity, and that's what we're coming out of in the synod, right? We had the exposure of extremity within our society. We had, you know, not just the expansion of social media through the Pluto Saturn synod in Libra, but the exposure of extremity. And so duality of Gemini is also emphasized by Venus here too. So this can also be an exacerbation of that, but because it's applying, you know, because it's got a North Node flavor to it, you know, we might say that, can we find the harmonizing, can Venus's natural harmonizing function play out here? And that as we start to look at the consequences of duality and extremity, maybe we can start to find ourselves back to the center, because that is always Venus's intention. Venus, as ruler of Libra, would want to swing to extremes to find the commonality, to find the center.
Yeah, right? She's doing great work there.
Yeah. Well, with her, you know, with her in the chart here on the North Node, and then the other thing that I pointed out too is that the North Node of Uranus is 12 degrees here in Gemini.
That's right.
And that as the node will get there eventually, right? As the node will transit there, that we might then start to see some real revolutionary thinking. We might really then start to see some breakthroughs and some liberation.
Well,
Yes.
just something that's really interesting with the Venus cycle doing the retrograde in Gemini is that it happened there 12 years ago. 2012 was a huge awakening too, just in the sense that the world is going into a different, age. Nothing like September 11th happened, but it was that reset. Okay, this world is finishing as we know it. Even though that happened at the end of the year. The Venus cycle in Gemini, I think, is the most potent for and connected to, big awakenings on the planet, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, where are we in time? So we're in, okay, could I just take a quick pee break?
Sure, darling.
How about I'll be back in 1 second,
I'll entertain everyone.
Move on.
Yeah, no worries. Do you want me to pause, or no? We can just keep having a little chat. So what else is coming up for everyone as you're hearing all of this? The balancing of masculine, feminine, yes, of course. Maybe women coming to power. Well, they have been, haven't we? Over the times. I think that's just really become much more of a norm in a sense, but we have worked hard for it. Still a way to go. If we think about, I'll just talk about the Venus retrogrades in Gemini because it's a topic that I'm very much interested in and doing a lot of work on. 2004 and 2012 were the last times she did the retrograde there. They were also the transit of Venus across the face of the sun. So very big indicators of, a great shift on the planet anyway. And the fact that they've been in Gemini and on Uranus's North Node really indicates the shifts and awareness, I think, that the planet is in, like I said. Oh, she's back. That was quick.
Quick. I looked at some of the chat before I left, and I was, somebody mentioned something about Saturn being feminine. Capricorn is a yin sign, and I'm right with you. But here's the thing to keep in mind. I did another lecture about this at NORWAC, where I reassigned mythology to actually reflect it, rather than this whole patricized Greco-Roman where everybody, the only feminine archetypes we get are like the moon and Venus, right? Even though we have yin yang, masculine, feminine, right? So I did a little lecture on reassigning archetypes to actually match, and also drawing from other mythologies besides just the Greco-Roman, to match the flow of the masculine and feminine within the natural zodiac. And to me, where Capricorn is highly patricized because it's male structure. It's the male, and I don't mean this in a sexual way. I mean it, in a gender way. I mean it in just whatever our worldview is right now. That it is a patricized worldview, and that it is intrinsic. It is yin. It's a yin sign. So what I assigned to that was actually Kali Ma. So Saturn to me is very Kali Ma, because what Kali Ma teaches us is that all matter is impermanent, right? And that is the truth of reality. But we don't live that way in patriarchal values. If we live that way in patriarchal values, our whole understanding of the Capricorn archetype in the 10th house might be different. We might build structures and recognize they're not going to be permanent, and we would be open to more, again, like the cycles of life, of birth and death, and so on and so forth, right? Anyway, too big a discussion, but I just noticed that and wanted to comment on that. Okay. Moving right along. So, I also wanted to mention, interesting, just Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, actually, interesting that their charts are somewhat similar, born in the same year. But that Clinton was elected at his reverse nodal return, and Trump was elected at the waning nodal square. It was like 10 degrees, so it had passed over Sag Gemini. I'm sorry, Pisces Virgo. but also interesting that we can associate both of these leaders with truth and lies, which is part of this archetype. Unfortunately, it's part of this Sag Gemini, blend of truth and lies. And, it was very clear in Bill Clinton, who they called, what did they call him? Slippery Willie or something like that. Slick Willie. And that the whole Monica Lewinsky thing happened when Pluto was applying to his south node here, right? So I would always say in an individual chart, to me, when I'm looking, and again, we're thinking individual, but how does that play out in the collective? There's some essential truth about themselves that they have to come to terms with, right? Again, it all depends on your evolutionary state and how self-aware you are, etc. There's a lot more caveats there. But there you have it. Okay. Whoops. Okay. Now, so if you have to think again to your chart, your transiting nodes will probably cover 2 houses, 1 house maybe if you're confined with, again, I use Porphyry house system, but may cover 1 or 2 houses over the next 18 months. So you can listen up for, these are just some ideas. These are just keywords to put out there of what the transits through those houses will mean for you. But again, remember what I said before, the transiting nodes are apparent karma. They're nuances of the underlying karmic complexes that are in your chart based on your Pluto position and your natal nodes. So let's say you have a Sagittarius south node in the 1st and Gemini north node in the 7th, right? So, we know that the 1st, 7th axis is very much about self and others. This graphic I thought really caught it, because the beauty of polarities, and especially the nodal axis, because it's always exactly opposite each other, teaches us something about alchemy. There's always a middle ground in polarities, right? There's always a connecting theme that we can find. And if we can get that syzygy of opposites, we find that this 3rd thing gets born out of the integration of the opposites. And here, this 3rd thing that gets born out of the syzygy of self and others, and finding that middle ground, is interdependence, right? So instead of going fully into independence or fully into others and codependence, we come to this beautiful realization of interdependence. So we could say if Sagittarius south node was transiting your 1st house and moving to the north node in the 7th house, that you would be bringing up some issues or focusing on the places where you've been a loner and independent, and moving or reforming your relationship with partnership and interdependency. You might be bringing more of your authentic self into your interpersonal relationships. What you don't want to degenerate to is a confrontational, because oppositions can bring out confrontations, my truth versus your truth. You want to move away from being defensive into accepting. You want to be curious about others. You want to start, because the archetype of Gemini and the 7th house, Gemini is the physical act of listening, and the 7th house is about really hearing, which means listening and taking in somebody's reality and being able to understand them where they're coming from, not just through your own lens. So this is really opening up curiosity to others and really hearing them, right? You may also find yourself aligning with others that share your beliefs, right? That's a nice way, a nice manifestation of that. On the opposite, if the Sagittarius south node is transiting the 7th and the Gemini north node's in the 1st, again, thinking of Sagittarius and its ruler, and that's one thing I forgot to point out about the past, about the ingress chart, that the ruler of Sagittarius south node is Jupiter in Capricorn, which is sandwiched. In fact, I can just jump back there, is sandwiched right here, midpoint between Pluto and Saturn, right? So You can draw your own conclusions about that. But my point being, Jupiter is going to blow things up. Sag blows things up. It expands upon things. So, you know, with it transiting the 7th house, it might bring to you either the nature of extremities around you, personal splits around you, or internally, your own personal splits, places where you're not congruent, and want to bring you to focus on picking up those pieces, about bringing some congruency to those things which are divergent within yourself. Like I said, your own personal splits, your own extremities. This also can push you to, if you've defined yourself by others' expectations, push you into experimenting with new identities, experimenting with a new sense of you. It can bring out the truths of codependence, or where you've been codependent or others are codependent with you. It can bring you to questioning, what do I really want? What do I really need? And opening up more to find out what that is. Bring you some energy to act upon your intuitions and instinct, right? Aligning your intuition with your instinct, allowing your curiosity to take the lead, or, you know, maybe even becoming a spokesperson or a leader, right? Putting that message out there. Gemini North Node in the 1st house, right? Okay. Next one, if you have Sag South Node in the 2nd house, Gemini North Node in the 8th. So 2nd house, 8th house, you know, 2nd Taurus, Gemini archetypes are a lot about soma and psyche to me, right? Body and psyche. So we can see some themes here about the interpenetration of how the psyche acts upon the body, and how working with the body reveals deeper layers of the psyche, and vice versa, as I said. You can, with Sagittarius South Node in the 2nd house, because Sagittarius is also a loner archetype, so it has an affinity to a certain way with the 2nd house and the isolation and insular nature there, whereas the 8th house would be pulling you out to merging more, to bringing yourself out of some kind of lonership, isolation, independence, insulation, and merging more, but in a really deep, meaningful way, right? Which is what Sag wants. Gemini wants to open up that possibility. This can be deep, and of course we know the 2nd house is a lot about self-worth, right? And Sag, your faith in your own self-worth. As we know, the more you reform your own self-worth and the way you feel about yourself, your beliefs about yourself, think Sag, is always reflected of how other people value you and how you're able to enter into relationship with others. And on this 2nd, 8th axis, it's intimately intertwined, right? So, you know, that saying of the more you love yourself, the more others can love you, sounds trite, but psychologically, it has very deep meaning. And it all has to do with your self-worth and values. So some of this may be up for reformation for you if it's transiting that axis. You may be opening to more transformative ideas, more transformative information. Sag, you know, Sag South Node in the 2nd house can bring up the nature of insular beliefs, right? How you haven't wanted to be open in the past, and now it can open you up. Also can transform the beliefs about what you value, what you own, what you possess, and all that's up for transformation. On the opposite side, the Sag South Node in the 8th house, Gemini North Node in the 2nd. Switching up your priorities, right? Changing your priorities. There's some lightening up here. There's some simplifying. There's some really coming to value and open up to simple pleasures, slowing it down, right? Stepping out of intensity, lightening it up. I mean, this is one good thing I forgot to mention, and not that I haven't mentioned a lot of good things, but this transiting Sag Gemini axis, one of the connecting themes when I was talking about the syzygy of opposites, one thing that connects Sag and Gemini is levity, right? Lightness, humor, these are all things we need right now. So this is a good thing. It's a good thing in general. And I think collectively we are going to feel that in this transit, some lightening up. But on this axis, there's some really moving away from the kind of 8th house intensity, right? And just coming down to simple pleasures. The ability to manifest, to really bring into being deep self-knowing. Also, Gemini in your 2nd house, expanding on resources, opening up to a variety of income streams, right? And also maybe finding words to articulate your values or what it is that's valuable to you, or finding that your words are of value, right? There's a lot of different plays of the way that that can express itself. Okay, Gemini, Sag, they're at home in these houses, although they're paradoxical when they're flipped. So if we take a Sagittarius South Node in the 3rd, intrinsically, you know, the 3rd, 9th house is about, although it's not, anyway, I won't get too deep into it. It's not an accurate depiction of what we understand the human psyche to be in the way that the brain operates, that it's literally left brain, right brain. But part of the functioning and the way that we process information, the way we express ourselves, and the way psyche expresses itself can be divided into these classifications. So yes, 3rd, 9th house can be very much about left brain, right brain, and the interplay of them. So when you put a Sag South Node in the 3rd house, Gemini North Node in the 9th house, you kind of flip that, right? So you can either have confusion or you can have synthesis. So this can be synthesizing information, right? It can be revisiting goals. It can also be getting scattered. These are some things we need to look out for. And remember when I was saying that Gemini is the looking at the trees. Well, if you put a Sag South Node in the 3rd house, all of a sudden the trees might have some meaning. Like they might make sense to you. All those dots, right? All of a sudden they make sense. You may come up with some new ideas about the ways and how you communicate. Excuse me, a little frog in my throat. An emphasis on words matter and facts matter, and that facts have deeper meaning. How others' worldview informs your beliefs. The dissemination, Sag in the 3rd house, Gemini in the 9th house, dissemination of big ideas, finding the words is what I was saying before. Staying in touch with or having a new interest in current philosophies. And again, the dichotomy of truth and lies. So all these things can come into your life either through, you know, this is the thing with transiting nodes. They can also bring these things into our lives through other people or through events that then, you know, point us back to something within ourselves. So these can be questions or things that arise within you, or people in your life suddenly start, you know, holding the qualities of these energies. So now the Sag South Node in the 9th, the Gemini North Node in the 3rd, quite at home there. Here we're bringing intuition. We're being able to bring intuition and facts together, right? Our inner voice, tuning into the inner voice and personal truth, like really being on target with our intuition. It can also be an exaggeration of dogma and fanaticism. So again, there's always things to look out for. We want to be in the moment, in the immediate environment. Gemini is really pushing things into the here and now, like I said before. And again, being comfortable with questions more than answers, but not getting scattered with that. Just allowing ourselves to get comfortable with more questions than answers. Listening and getting the message out. Right? Gemini in the 3rd is definitely about getting the message out, and varieties of ways. You may find you're reinventing yourself. You may find you're reinventing or just discovering so many diverse ways of personal expression. Okay, 4th, 10th house. Yeah, this image here is about the root, and that the root is consciousness, and if we tend to the root, the tree as a whole will be healthy. 4th house is the root. It's the IC of the chart. right? It's where we come from. But, you know, archetypally, it's our home on the planet. It's our place here in the here and now. So it's, you know, the cardinal point here. It's a very important point. I always liken the 4th, 10th house to Jung's concept of the anima animus, right? Anima animus being the inner masculine and the inner feminine. So when we have anything in those houses, you know, this becomes a focus for us. This, how do I bring the quandary of this house, or the evolutionary challenge of these houses, 4th, 10th, is always, to me, how do I bring my inner world to the outer world? And how does the outer world come into my inner world, right? And this is, and how do, you know, so how do, you know, how do I bring my home to my career is another way that people would look at it. But this is anima animus, right? Bringing the inner and the outer together. So with Sagittarius transiting there, the South Node transiting there, Gemini pointing you to the 10th house, this make the balance of your own inner masculine and feminine, how you bring yourself out into the world. Is it aligned? Is it aligned with your authentic self? Are you able to bring your sensitive self out into the world? And if not, if it's not shown in your career, maybe you're going to find some dissatisfaction with that. You know, you're going to find you need to change it up, that you need to find a way to be able to really bring that inner world to the outer world. You may also have a renewed interest in your ancestry and your role in the family and your roots, your deep roots. Gemini, North Node in the 10th is going to want you to be putting yourself out there, communicating your feelings publicly. You may, like I said before, you may find some new outer expression, what we typically call career, involving ways to communicate. You may find more ways to bring your inner knowing into outer expression. You may also find that you become the answer man, right? You're the answer person. People want to hear what you have to say. Gemini, North Node in the 10th house, some kind of natural authority around the information that you have to share, right? Okay, Sag South Node in the 10th, Gemini North Node in the 4th. So with the Gemini North Node pointing to the 4th, you could be changing or expanding your home base, or what happens in your home, very literally. In fact, I remember when I looked at mine, my transiting nodes back in 2000, 2001, went from the 10th to the, I have Sag on the MC. So when the nodes transited, they went from my 10th to my 10th, 4th to 9th, 3rd. And I moved, right, when it was in the, so this can happen. Changing something up, bringing some kind of variety into the home, whatever it is. Lots of things could happen there. Again, opening to variety of ways to increase your emotional security. Bridging ways to bring career and home together. A lot of people are doing this now. I mean, I meant to say, you know, if you want to look at how the collective plays out nodal transits, just look at Capricorn to Cancer, right? Like we did it so literally. Everybody was forced to stay home, right? And work from home. Bring your outer world into the inner world, right? We've been doing it. So it's funny when you look at the ways that the collective can play out energies, sometimes very literal. Bridging ways, like I said, bring career and home together. Understanding your own emotional dynamics and questioning them, right? This can also be about maturing your emotional dynamics, lightening up your family ties, and learning from home. Again, a lot of people are doing that right now, homeschooling. 5th house, 11th house, head and heart. That's just a general theme. There's a lot more to be said about these, but it's the kind of, when we can bring head and heart together, we're really pulsing, bringing together that 5th, 11th house energy. So with Sagittarius South Node in the 5th, you might be looking at matters of the heart, right? What I call the giving and receiving of love, because it's the circulation of the moving around of the energy. And sometimes we have wounds there and we become aware of them. Sagittarius deals with trust, so it might be ways that your heart's been wounded by trust, but then you get a renewed faith in that, which then allows you to bring that out more, right? To circulate in wider circles or expand your tribe, your like-minded others. Find some heart opening that comes to you through the 11th house. Passionate communication to groups would also be a really interesting expression of this. Finding the courage to speak your heart, right? Having a change of heart because being exposed to radical ideas or formulating your own radical ideas that give you a change of heart. Creative self-expression encouraged by like-minded others. This is a really important, particularly potent expression of this nodal axis transiting this. Because when we get mirrored by our like-minded others in our tribe, or when we can find our tribe, it gives us courage of creative self-expression, right? We find that, we're not the odd man out. And that's part of what, the 11th house can bring out in us. The 11th house can bring out the fear of standing out or past wounds of alienation. But when we can find ourselves mirrored by our tribe and supported by our tribe, we can then find the power of really bringing our heart out into the world. Another, maybe not so great manifestation of that can be tribalism, meaning people gathering in their little tribes and warring against other tribes, again, on the collective level. So the Sag South Node in the 11th, Gemini North Node in the 5th. This is bringing your ideals into creative expression, right? The 11th house is about ideals, idealism, right? Big future inspirations, flashes of inspiration, how we bring that into creative expression. You can find maybe a variety of ways that spark your creative expression, right? Open up a whole bunch of different possibilities that you hadn't thought of before, or hadn't come across as an opportunity before. It can also be opening up your romantic life, playing the field, right? Getting attracted to others by ideas or the dissemination of ideas. It can be, so again, the Sag South and the 11th could be a little aligned with being the outcast and the loner, but you then find some new courage, right? You find some new friends, you find something new that lifts your heart. And then also, again, the courage of having that personal creative self-actualization despite what others think, right? Gemini North Node in the 5th. All right, 6th, 12th house. This to me also, and I put this in here, this is from another talk I did on alchemal stages and planetary archetypes. The 6th, 12th house very much is this stage in alchemy that's called dissolution, which is very interesting because it's very much like disillusionment. And the alchemal process, as we know, was in fact, all of our growth, all of our learning, especially when we're talking karma and evolution, it's all an alchemal process, right? It's all of this cooking. And like I said, the cooking of the bringing the shadow out and, popping the zit and like letting all the dross come up to the surface. And then we transform it into some kind of gold. That is the alchemical process. We're always in it. We're always in it in some way. And the whole evolutionary process is alchemical in that way. And there's different stages of alchemy. So this particular one is called, like I said, dissolution, which is very much like disillusionment. And it's this stage in alchemy where the ashes that had been burned get dissolved into the water. And what this stage represents is submergence into the unconscious, right? So you see this king figure getting dissolved into the water, surrendering into the water. It's like in this stage, you have to surrender to the deepening of the process. Psychologically, it kind of represents a blurring, like, and the reason why this is important, not just on this individual nodal axis, but thinking back to the Neptune square the nodes, this is a collective theme too. So I know I'm thinking on two levels at once. I hope I'm not losing you, but my mind works like that. On the collective level, we are in this shadow process of disillusionment, right? As the nodes transit into Gemini Sag, we find this to be very strongly the case, because all of these archetypes then start to come into play. So that the disillusionment represents this kind of blurring of the boundaries of the psyche in total, an immersion into the non-rational, immersion into the feminine or rejected parts of the consciousness, the part of shadow work. But it can also be described as flow, right? So this can also bring about, if you surrender to that process, it can bring about this kind of the bliss of creative expression, the power of imagining and dreaming, right? But then that also always interplays with the fear of being subsumed, right? The fear of the loss of the boundary of self plays against what can we imagine, what can we dream out of this process. You know, astrologically, this relates a lot to being able to be in this phase of becoming, where I was talking about before, where you get disillusioned with either or solutions, or even having an affinity for one of the opposites. You have to surrender what you know, right? And not replace it with something else. So when we look at it specifically on the 6/12 axis here, we have Sagittarius South Node in the 6th. The 6/12 axis is also very much about, and I put body in parentheses because that's very kind of Taurus, etheric body to me, mind, spirit, right? But we know that, anyway, too long a discussion, you know that the ruler of, you know, the ruler of Virgo is Mercury and Earth, right? So it's bringing body, mind, and spirit together. So you may find themes like this coming up for you with the Sag South Node transiting in the 6th. The rational meeting the irrational, right? This is meant to be happening because that dissolution is supposed to happen. Gemini North Node in the 12th, opening to so many channels of information, can be overwhelming, right? You know, if you think of a person with a natal Mercury in Pisces or in the 12th house, they are often open to so many levels of information at once. So you may find yourself opening up in these ways. You know, classically, it's mediumistic or spiritualistic, or just opening up to different broad bandwidth. That's it. Expanding your bandwidth, but don't get lost or overwhelmed. Yeah, this can also be disillusioning in that, you know, the thought process is getting dissolved so much. It can be something like, it used to make sense, but now what? Right? That, again, that state of uncertainty. I thought I knew, but now what? So here's, you know, like I said, the part of the key here is surrendering what you don't know, surrendering trying to figure it all out, and trusting that you know enough. Whatever it is in the moment, you know enough, whatever the truth is in the moment. So if we flip it around and we put the Sag South Node in the 12th and the Gemini North Node in the 6th, there can be an increased focus on alternative health, right? Bringing spirit into matter. This is the body, mind, spirit connection. The practical application of that, finding techniques, methodologies, skills, or just ability, right? You know, Gemini is a jack of all trades. Gemini is this ability to use the hands in practical ways. So bringing spirit into matter. 6/12 house is always about discerning. So this is also bringing that laser-like focus that Mercury can have, right, of discerning truth. right? This is a double Gemini, a double Mercury signature with the Gemini North Node in the 6th. Learning, like I said, learning new methods and techniques, becoming aware of how you digest, assimilate information, or learning different ways, bringing your focus into learning how to digest or assimilate information in different ways, and making the mundane magical. Right? Gemini is so present, and so Virgo to me is also 6th house. Virgo is also a kind of here and now, clear-eyed reality. Bang, what's right in front of you, right? Yet we have this polarity coming from the 12th house, which is just bringing grace and bringing magic into the mundane, or even discovering magic in the mundane. So that's some of the possibilities with the transits through these houses. Back to this image. You know, before I say that, I think I want to just say something about, again, summing up this whole diatribe that I've given you, summing it up and going back to surrendering what you know. Don't replace it with something, right? Let it gestate. Overall, that Sagittarian sense of, I know the truth, my truth, this is what gives me meaning. We're going to be challenged to surrender some of that. Neptune square. I also forgot to mention Neptune square the nodes in the way that it is in evolutionary astrology. We always look to the node to the left as having a key to a resolution of that square, right? The node to the left is Sagittarius. So there is something about surrendering these truths we've known to be self-evident, right? There's a surrendering of them. So because we need to get back to the authentic self, right? Even those things that you've held as sacred meaning, you need to get back to the authentic self. Heal what blurs the lens of your own inner perception. So that Neptune can infuse you. So Neptune can infuse you with divine inspiration. It most likely is not going to be what you thought it was, right? And that's part of what Neptune likes. Neptune wants to get you to that place of confusion where it can then spiritualize and infuse you with something that's beyond what you thought you knew, right? So this is part of the process going on here. Again, collectively, it may play out a little more messy than it can individually. But, you know, part of the reason is just collectively, there's this whole, what I call the law of, you know, the lowest common denominator. And unfortunately, if you put a group of people together, consciousness is going to flow to the lowest common denominator. So either we can say that the majority of the people are not in a more involved state of consciousness, a consensus state of consciousness, or we can say if you put any group of people, right, it often is going to flow to the lowest common denominator, which means it isn't going to get played out in the most perfected form. But as individuals, we have more of an opportunity to do that, right? When we when we take charge of our evolution, right? When we harness the faculties of our awareness so that, and we use them to evolutionary intent, then yes, we have the ability to come closer to the manifestation of ideals as individuals. We just don't do it well collectively. All right. So I'm just bringing you back to this image again for you to contemplate for yourself, having heard everything I had to say, for you to contemplate for yourself, what is this single thing that you held, cherished, believed, staked your meaning on, right? That you can release up into the heavens and then have it come back to you in many different perspectives and forms. Now, you might not come up with an answer now, but contemplate it. Make it a kind of meditative image for yourself. Okay. And since we don't know if we're going to have long distance travel or short distance journeys, we don't know. So let's always remind ourselves that journeying is not just physically getting on a plane. Rumi says it very beautifully. Journeys bring power and love back into you. If you can't go somewhere, move in the passageways of the self. They are like shafts of light, always changing, and you change when you explore them. Again, mutability, the circulation of energy. Keep it moving. Keep it moving. That's part of what I think the strategy is with this transiting nodal axis. All right. Questions or anything we want to talk about before we call it a night?
Thanks, Patricia. It's always so good to take a journey with you. Really cool. I love those images, and I love that image. I took a screen grab. I'll have to promote you again with it. Is that all right?
This one?
Yeah, fantastic. I tried to make one. Yes, I tried to, but it wasn't as good. So that's really cool. There are a few, and yeah, oh gosh, it just reminds me the last time this cycle, it kind of moved from my 7th to the 6th, was when I was putting my thesis together for astrology, like finishing my studies.
Oh, wow.
So when all the big ideas were coming, I thought, oh, that's right. Yeah, wow. So coming around again. But there's a few questions. Okay. With the North Node in Gemini, do you see a swing toward expressing more of the diversity of sexuality and gender identity-based cultures?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Because, again, Pluto, this is a beautiful thing that we've seen of the Pluto in Capricorn time. It's a big, longer discussion, but gender bending, right? And the Pluto Libra generation, so much bringing that into collective consciousness, because they bring it in as a collective group of incarnating souls, the whole quandary of gender identity. And I don't mean quandary, I mean about your assigned gender that society gives you, as opposed to how you feel about yourself, and the way that the Pluto Libras are just bending all of that and mutating the way that we relate and who we relate with and what we call it and what we call ourselves and our gender identity. So absolutely, yes. Yes.
Okay. Anonymous attendee asking, how do I deal with a partner who is constantly lying to me?
Well, I guess that's a loaded question.
That's right.
It's a loaded question with you know, a lot. I mean, I would have to say that, I mean, what you would have to examine is, again, why are you in a relationship with a person who constantly lies to you? Now, now it's not as simple as that. I understand, because the reasons we're in relationships, you know, are very complex sometimes. We can be in karmic trances with people. We may be bound to somebody because of our financial situation, and or our kids, or there's, I know, you know, I don't want to make it sound trite, because I understand it's not. You know, there's a lot of parameters that come into why we're in relationship with somebody, but that is a foundational question, right? You know, why is that person in your life? What do they serve? What you know, what are you guys playing out together? So I would have to say that that's a foundational question to answer for yourself, and then the rest of it might become clearer.
Yeah, I'd be kind of wondering how long they've been together. How long have you let this been happening? No, sorry. Okay, Kim's asking, my sun is at 29 Virgo, so it seems that both the nodes squaring my sun at this time. Any thoughts?
I sometimes I have to write things down because I don't. What is it? You said your sun is at 29.
No, the sun is at 29 Virgo, so therefore this shift now is going to square. Of course, the beginning of the nodal shift will square her sun.
Oh, right. I don't know. I wouldn't. I mean.
Well, it's the sun at the bendings then, in that sense,
Yeah,
isn't it? Like
yeah.
So it's the same concept.
Well, I would say that just energetically, you know, just overall kind of archetypally, the sun is our integrative function, right? It's also our public ego, rather than, it's the way that we put ourselves, or the self-image that we project out there. So with the nodal shift, again, Sag Gemini, you know, there might be some mixing up of that.
The Virgo self has to balance the two sides, you know, the good of Sagittarius and the new Gemini coming in. Yeah. So it's a balance point, you know, the sun integrating those two sides is how I'd see it.
Yeah. Good.
And depending on what house, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, houses are very important in transiting nodes, for sure.
Yeah. Next one, by keep it moving, you mean be responsive to the mutable energy? Yes, I'd say so.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing. Mercury, this is what Mercury as a god is a trickster. And Mercury has no interest whatsoever in outcome. Right? I mean, Mercury is all about mixing it up, and keep mixing it up, right? So yeah, energetically, it's about well, the mutability and the finding the comfort level with that space between definitive, what we think is definitive. Again, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying, but I'm saying that we're going to be in it. You know, it can be part of the theme of what's coming up. It doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna always be like that. But I would, like I said, as a personal practice, you know, I would say try to get back to your authentic self as much as possible by tuning out everything first. And then letting it back in. Like I said, take a media fast, take a news fast, take a technology fast, get back in touch with the Sag essence, right? Get back in touch with the Sag essence, to your center, to your core, to your authentic self, and then open up again to information, but then don't form your sense of meaning around around the information that you're taking in. Right.
Good point. I like the idea of during Venus retrograde to have some days that you switch off. Like I'm going to try and do that. Like I said, I'm just not here for 3 days, you know.
Yeah.
There's been so much online at the moment, you know, it's like I need a break, but I think that would be so healthy for everyone. Like the planet switched off, now can we just switch off online for a bit?
That's it.
Know?
Yeah.
We'll see how good that has been for everything. Okay, another one. Would Neptune square the nodes perhaps relate to hiding from one's true sexuality, or Neptune square the nodes, or inability to express the truth of one's sexuality? Example, the truth that one is really bisexual, but fear to express the truth of it all.
Yes, sure. Absolutely. I mean, Mercury is a hermaphrodite, right? Mercury swings both ways as a god. Right? So, you know, we could say it's a hermaphroditic energy. So yes, definitely. Yeah. I mean, comfort with duality is another way of saying it. Coming into a comfort, a curiosity, right? This is always the thing we also have to think of with Gemini as an archetype, is just the word curiosity, developing a healthy curiosity to that which is divergent and different. And
yeah, right. Yes, it suits perfectly. I mean, I suppose the Neptune can be confusing. Is this really me, or is this, you know, really in me? And I think the houses of where that's happening, and only you know, this is what you have to trust yourself about, right? Yeah. What arises, what feelings are arising about who you truly are. So whatever houses that is, listen to yourself. Not anyone else. This is exactly what you were saying. Like, it's not anyone else's truth that's important now. It's the one that I'm putting together about making sense of everything. Okay. Kim's just asking, generally, how important are nodal returns? Well, yes, important?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Nodal returns. Like I said, you know, the nodal squares, reverse nodal returns, and exact nodal returns are very important. You know, they're moments with destiny, right? They're where the
Yeah.
future and the past come together and accentuate your choice, your ability to make choice or not make choice of in the moment based on your future and your past, right? So yeah, anything based on, you know, did I say that right? When I say choice, I mean, are you still conditioned so much by the past or wounded or unhealed that you don't have the free will to act in the future? So when, or to act in the now that then affects your future, so that you're not continuing to repeat the same wounds and past. This is the whole
Yeah.
karmic dilemma, right? So, so yeah, nodes square, nodes reverse, nodes nodal return brings that into focus for sure.
Yeah, they are pivotal points that really point, if you're going the wrong direction, you will be really kind of readjusted somehow.
Yeah.
That's not where I'm supposed to be going somehow, as you know, as the calling of the soul. So, yeah, important to look when they've happened in your life before and what sort of shifts happened in your life. And of course, they happen around the age of 19, 37, and in the 18.6 year cycle. So,
Right. Yeah, it's
now the
always
other,
important to put it into the individual context, right?
yeah. Now, I think all the rest, let me just scan through them. A lot of people thanking you. Diana's absolutely fantastic. Can I wait to read it again? Because Shirley's got her notes in Gemini Sag. The Virgo sun forms a grand cross with Neptune in Pisces. I think that was a comment on what we were talking about, emphasis on discernment. Do you look at sun sign houses too for the nodal shift? Well, you can, of course. Meaning that, let's say I'm a Pisces, so the nodal shift is happening in my 10th, and, you know, solar sun being the first house, it's happening in my 10th and 4th. Yeah, that adds another meaning to it, sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, the nodal transits, I think I made that point, it bears repeating. They're not the exact karma, they're nuance, right? So it's going to bring out a flavor that's going to relate back to your own. So if at any reference point in your chart, you want to go back to your own natal Pluto and the nodes, right? And that then the transiting nodes are going to be nuances of that.
Yeah, right. Okay, someone's asking, and this is more of a technical question. I have Sag in 6th and Gemini in 12th, and it's intercepted. And you're saying there is no degree here. Well, it's still going to be 30 degrees in an intercepted house. Okay, it's still going to be 30 degrees, the whole transit of Gemini, Sag nodes, and the 18 months it takes to go through there is 30 degrees. I hope that makes sense for you.
So it's all going to be, in other words, it's all going to be happening in your 6-12.
Yeah, and the idea of the intercept is that it's harder to access what's going on. That's more with natal. How do you see that as a transit? Transiting through intercepted.
Well, again, transiting through an intercepted can bring it into focus. In evolutionary astrology, we have a different perspective of interceptions. We can say that, as Jules said, it can either be something that's underdeveloped or hard for you to reach, or it can be something that you're so developed with that your soul just simply didn't need to put it on a house cusp to make it, like, it's integrated, right? It's integrated. So you don't need it on a house cusp to rule a house. So
you don't need that lesson.
Yeah, you don't need it. It's just like you just do it, right? You know, it's like a trine. You just do it. So naturally, so you would have to ascertain for yourself on the 6-12, you know, whatever that sign, how well you feel you're integrated with that and which side of that you're on.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. All the other comments are thanking you so much.
Oh, yay. Well, then
for
you have to send me,
amazing.
you'll have to send me that chat then if you save
I
the
will,
chat, so
I will.
can read it later.
Yeah, just thanking you and appreciating your insights and wisdom. Yeah, I know. Isn't she amazing? Thank you, Patricia. We better let you go now.
Yay!
See? Hey, I haven't kept you. No. Yeah, stay sane. Thank you so much. You're a great teacher. Of course you are. Yes, you are.
Oh,
wonderful. I hope that's really helped you all to kind of see the picture that's coming up and inspire you to what is happening in your chart with this shift. Hey, yeah. I mean, I'm really much more inspired now going, gosh, yeah, I've got to, rewrite some story.
Yeah, rewrite a story. That's a good one. Yeah. Where is it in yours? Again, you said
it's moving from the seventh to the sixth. Yeah. I mean, I've kind of felt in this kind of lockdown quite a few relationships shifting. Just what's more important, whatever. Anyway, and using my time differently as it moves into the sixth. But the mercurial ruler, as you said, he goes everywhere and all that kind of stuff. But he's a script writer. We're writing our own script somehow, isn't it? With the Neptune square going on at the moment to Venus. So don't be scared to write your own script.
That's it, right? Rewrite your story. Yeah.
When I was writing the script for the CIA, people thought I was mad, right? So don't be scared to be mad either.
Yeah,
crazy.
That's it. Yeah.
I mean, Gemini's a little bit known for that, sort of like, whoa.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fun. We joked a little bit, like, get on the bipolar express now. It's taken. I'm going to make a meme. Get on the bipolar, because I mean, really, in the end, the chaos out there that's happening is not going to settle down quickly, is it?
Right.
It's opened up this Pandora's box of whoa.
Yeah.
What is happening? So just kind of be aware, be awake, be
well, I
adventurous.
think until we get into those transits going into Aquarius, like I mentioned, Saturn and Jupiter, and then eventually Pluto, and even then, I mean, that has its own caveats, right? That has its own. That's got its own. It's a whole other story. See you in another year or two where we talk about that, right?
Yeah. No, it's quite amazing, really. Interesting times. May you live in interesting times.
Yes, a blessing and a curse.
But I don't think any of us thought that we'd ever live in this kind of time. Do you know what I mean?
I did. No. So wait, I have a karmic thing. So I have 0-degree nodes, which are a culminating thing. And it really, that's just the reference point. Not that I came from that. Every life, I've done a couple hundred of my own past lives. And I've worked with a lot of shamans. And I had this incredible vision quest out in the desert with this shaman years ago out in Arizona. And he and I both went into this energy of the soul, my soul, that always incarnates at the fall of a civilization.
Yeah, good.
And I've been there. So now, because I've done a couple hundred of my own past lives, right? I was at the fall of Phoenicia. I've been at the end of orders. And this is the funny thing. So here I am in the desert doing this vision quest, and we're both in a trance, and we go into this intense experience, and I'm going back to Lemurian times, all kinds of crazy stuff. But it was the end of the Lemurian era, entering into the Aquarian era, and the Atlantean era, and he's going into the same thing simultaneously. And then we're voicing these things, and then I said, yeah, I always incarnate at the end. He goes, and now you did it again. And that was 15 years ago. Right?
Yeah, right.
So here we are now, right?
Yeah,
right. 15 years ago, he said, oh, and now you did it again.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Well, I don't know. It's the end of the world as we know it, right?
It's the end of the world as we know it.
But
we wanted a better one anyway. we wanted a better one. It's almost like, you know, what I was saying about 2012, we anticipated something that was going to push through better with, you know, what followed, Pluto, Uranus squares, revolutions, you know, all that.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, you know, we asked for some change, we asked for a big change, and here it is, the redo,
and that's what I mean
reshift.
about the Aquarius, because I've said it even before. When Neptune was so in the heart of Pisces, you know, when the 15-degree mark, I'm like, we're so far from the vision bubbling to the surface yet. Now that it's moving out, we don't, I mean, that's part of what's so disconcerting of all these changes. The vision is not yet formed, right? This is part of the problem.
That's Aquarius's job, isn't it?
But that's what I mean. So that when we get to that point, we may start to have glimpses, you know, as we start breaking into Aquarius. What is the new vision?
And it
but
takes
you know
shape
what?
and form.
This nodal shift, Sag is very visionary too, right? I mean, maybe, you know, maybe there's intimations to be seen here too.
Well, the ideas are going to start flying around, you know, from that
and
Sag
it's going to cross, and it's going to cross Uranus's north node.
Right?
So we, you know, there's a lot of good stuff to come out of this.
Innovation, invention, so much new stuff that we can't even really anticipate. I mean, just those satellites that have gone up in the last.
Oh, I know.
Like
I know, but and that's
okay.
So that now you're going to get to the shadow of Aquarius, right? Let's not go there. That's a whole other webinar.
We're going to do another symposium later in the year. It was going to be around June solstice, but I'm going to kind of put it back a bit, and it will be called the Age of Aquarius or something. So it's going to be all about Aquarius.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
All right. So anyway, lots to look forward to. Thanks for everyone for being online.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again to Patricia. We better let it go, hey?
Yeah. Okay, so...
But thanks for your Sunday night, darling. Yeah,
thanks.
99.9. We appreciate you. We love your info. Okay. And everyone will get the recording after this. So just hang in there for a bit until it's all rendered. And